I got the Jenna's Promise coffee. Awesome. So much for all the brave advocacy steps. We were talking about it before we came on air, just like all the awesome stuff you're doing here in this community, which is so important. And if you want me to just dive into telling my story, I will certainly do that, because it's a privilege to even be here. It's a privilege to be breathing. And before I start talking about recovery in any sense, in any context, I like to take a moment just to ground myself in gratitude for all the friends that I lost, all of the friends and the families who are still struggling, because addiction isn't just a personal disease, it's a family disease and a community disease. So if you're out there in active addiction, I just want you to know recovery is possible. That's off top before we ever do it. My sobriety date is June 13th, 2016, but I stay that way because I only have today. Let's not get it twisted. I only have this 24 hours. If you're sober and clean and you woke up before 7:15 a.m. this morning, you have more clean time than me, even though I have continuous recovery. But with all that said, I like to say that I was an addict and an alcoholic in the way that I consider it before I ever took my first drink. Now, what does that mean? Because a lot of people who aren't addicts and have never dealt with addiction and the psychology behind it, or seen it in their family or their friends or their community on a large scale, typically associate it with seeking chemical escapism in a compulsive and destructive pattern. But that compulsive destructive pattern manifested in different ways before I ever understood that I could self-medicate through the chemicals that became my destruction, and then eventually led to the recovery that became my salvation. When I was a little kid, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Diagnoses aside, I feel more comfortable looking in this camera than I do looking you in the eye. There's a little phenomenon called sensory overload, which means that everybody is sensitive to their senses. I mean, I might just be the same as everyone else and not know how to deal with it, but whenever I look at someone, whenever I'm out in public, the visual and the sonic and even olfactory, the smells, like everything just hammers me, and I don't feel comfortable within my own skin. And so before alcohol or drugs ever came in the picture, for as long as I remember being conscious, I would turn to external sources to feel comfortable, because the way I can articulate it now looking back was that I never felt like I was deserving of basic human happiness. I never felt like I belonged. I know that's an overused word, but it's the truth. There's a lot of people out there like me, regardless of whether they struggle with addiction or autism spectrum disorder and the complications that come with it. but I would seek out approval from other people. That was my first drug. Approval from my parents when I was young, approval from other people. Then I started compulsively collecting different things. Video games and Beanie Babies were some of my original drugs of choice. Pogs, all that stuff. I'm a 31-year-old millennial, so that's what it was. And, that continued until I was about 13. And I'll never forget it. I was in 8th grade, and I was in my friend's basement. And I had a sip or two of alcohol ceremonially, either with my parents knowing about it and just wanting to expose it to me so it wasn't the forbidden fruit. A sip of wine, sip of champagne at a New Year's party, sneaking a beer. But I didn't really know what it was doing until I tried it a couple times. But I still, in terms of it, muting out those voices in my head that told me that I didn't think I was good enough, muting out that sensory overload, giving me a chemical escape rather than escaping through a product, a thing, or a person for that different chemical external solution. But when the gears started turning in my mind and I realized that the chemical was altering the way that I felt and reducing my stress, when I finally put that all together, the first time I intentionally sought out the feeling that alcohol gave me when I was 13, that's what I count as my first drink, because everything before was just innocent curiosity. There was no connection between the action of taking the drink and finding that relief. But I was in my friend's basement, sleeping over, just chilling with one of my friends, and he told me that he had found a 6-pack of Sam Adams Oktoberfest behind the couch. And he had an older sister, so his parents monitored the liquor cabinet very closely, but they had forgotten all about this. And it literally had cobwebs on it. I mean, it was disgusting. It was like one step short of moldy, but like, I opened that beer and I drank it and it tasted disgusting. But it calmed those burgeoning voices inside of me. And for a second, I thought I was okay. I thought I didn't have to fight with my inner voices anymore. And, it was a lucid kind of bliss that I had, chemical bliss that I had never experienced, but it came at a price. And that price is that I chased it in an escalating manner for the next 10 years. From when I was 13 to when I was 24 and a half. And, I want to get something off the bat, right off the table. Like, I'm privileged in many ways, most of which have nothing to do with money or status or socioeconomic standing, but I do come from a home where I didn't want for anything. My parents, they got divorced, but they were loving parents. I had a little bit of trauma, with their separation, and my mom dealing with some mostly emotional and somewhat physical abuse from her boyfriend, who was also an alcoholic. God rest his soul, he passed a couple years after I got sober. But for the most part, I never wanted for anything. My parents gave me access to good education. They took care of me. They got me into therapy for that. I like to say we didn't own the shopping mall, but we sure as hell shopped there. Like, I was a kid of privilege, but that privilege could not protect me from myself. All that sheltering that was put in place from society, from my parents, from everything, it only served as a buffer to consequences rather than me trying to self-medicate. And the consequences started out pretty suburban. My drinking was pretty under wraps until high school when everybody started partying. And, at first the consequences were very, 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 very kind of like 1950s Leave It to Beaver. Like, I would miss a track meet. I would be hung over to a piano judging. And music's a big part of my story and my recovery too. But, that was the one discipline that my parents made sure that I did. Like, they let my grades slip a little bit. They kind of chalked that up to, the autism spectrum stuff. They got me tutors. But piano, that's what I had to do. I had to practice every day. That was my discipline. For some people, it's sports. For some people, it's, working in the wood shop. Whatever it is. And thank God they did, because that was the one discipline that through all of my years, music in all of its various forms, was something that was a high that I chased that was actually beneficial. Something outside of myself that gave me meaning and purpose. And I'll touch back later on that in terms of like the journey of recovery. But, the consequences started escalating a little bit, getting suspended from school for smoking cigarettes on campus, being ostracized by teachers, and somewhat, rightly villainized, because even though I wasn't the only dealer at school, I wasn't good at hiding it. I wasn't ever good at hiding the fact that I was an addict. In fact, at the time, I thought everybody else was crazy for not using drugs the way I did. I thought everybody else felt the same way I did. But the difference between me and the other kids is that, sure, they would drink, and in a way they could have even been functional alcoholics. We were pounding fifths of Jack Daniels every weekend. But when the party was over, they went back to their life. When the blunt stopped smoking, when the coke was off the table, when, the ecstasy pills were all gone, they slept off their hangover, they went back into school, and that was their life. and my life was the party. And, in high school, I kind of like okayed my consequences, said, well, everybody's doing it. But, I got into college by the skin of my teeth because I kept pursuing my musical passion. But I dropped out within like 3 months of getting in there because I firmly believe that anybody can get sober regardless of where they go. But when you are a budding cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol addict, maybe South Beach, Miami isn't exactly
that wasn't
the
a great
right
choice.
Nah,
No,
not at
no.
all. Like in the rap community, they call that MIAO because the whole Scarface thing, the whole Port of Miami thing in the 80s, and that was still true there when I went there. And I was just focused on partying, chasing girls, chasing a high. And, at that point, my primary musical passion, although I'd gotten into school for classical piano, was switched to hip hop. And that was one of the other things. Hip hop gets a bad rap. A lot of people associate hip hop with drugs, but honestly, freestyling at parties was the only thing I wanted to do more than get high. And the more and more I started to get high, the more that passion started to slip away from me. I recorded with some different artists like Mac Miller, God rest his soul, another casualty of the addiction epidemic, Project Pat from 3-6. I'm not saying this to name drop. I'm saying it, maybe I am, but to contextualize the fact that I had all these opportunities that my family gave me and that I made for myself. But when I dropped out of school, that high became the most important thing. And a lot of people don't talk about the consequences of addiction in regards to the family. And there were many consequences in my life. I got a DUI. I got a bunch of other minor infractions. I didn't do any serious time. My privilege and my loving family bailed me out of most of it. But, I'll say this. When I was driving back after blowing through the college account my family had given me by forging checks and trying to be a big shot, driving around the country, spending money that wasn't mine, pretending it was mine, pretending I was this big dealer when really I was sneaking into my mom's purse and grabbing checks from my college account to cash them at the bank behind her back and buy all this coke and weed and alcohol to drive around the country and visit my friends who were in college. And so I could be this guy, I wasn't in college, but I was still going to college parties, kind of trying to play both sides of this egotistic dichotomy. And that all snapped in half when I came back from when I burned through all the money in that account, almost all of it. I drove back from Philadelphia in January of 2012 from a party at St. Joseph's and Villanova University where I had gone with my friends to get high and drink. And it was a sleety day in Washington, D.C., and we ain't got like the icy, crackly snow like you got up in Vermont.
Right.
You might get some slush up in April or, maybe like a little before Thanksgiving, depending on where you're at. But like in D.C., it's slush. It's not what you want. It's like a bad day on the ski slopes. But anyway, I'm driving 20 miles over the speed limit, and I make a left turn, and I crash into 3 other cars. And I'm not drunk at the time, or so I think. I haven't drank anything that morning, but I drank a 1/5 and a half of scotch the night before, and I was hungover as hell, and I was impaired. And the first thought that I had when I stepped out of that car and the cops came up wasn't, oh, damn, I'm going to jail. Oh, damn, is everybody else okay? Like, I just smashed into 3 cars. Oh, damn, the car I took from my mom, which isn't mine, which I had stolen to drive to this party and forced her to give to me under threats, that's totaled. My first thought was, I'm not going to be able to drink or use today if I go to jail. Because I didn't care about anybody else. I didn't care about the policeman that got calling the taxpayer money. I didn't care about the other people. And it's not that I wish them any malevolent ill will or that I didn't have any sympathy for them. It's just that my addiction came first. Before anything else.
Which is what happens in for everybody. That's what happens.
It is. And, a lot of people say, well, it's a discipline issue. It's a moral issue. Addiction is a choice. And my thing is, yes, it might be a mental choice, but that mental choice is underpinned usually by trauma or mental health issues that aren't being addressed. So even though I'm making that choice to turn to an external chemical solution, and maybe if I did tap into that discipline, I could have done it. If I'm not addressing those underlying issues and getting the help that I need because I'm too proud to ask or too scared to ask, which is the case for me, then that choice is something I'm going to repeat over and over again, whether or not it's a matter of discipline. But, I got in that crash and my family intervened. They didn't send me to treatment yet. They're like, you can't drink anymore. And I was scared a little bit, so I stopped drinking, but I didn't stop using mind-altering substances. And I did, in recovery circles, what's called a geographic. And my dad had moved out to California. He stayed till the end of high school. God bless him for that. But he had remarried, moved out to California. And I said, well, I'm just going to blow town while I wait for my DUI trial. And I'm going to grow my hair out. and I'm going to go smoke weed in California, and I'm going to be that guy. And I'm going to, take the remaining money in my college account and use it to make a down payment on this art school semester where I transferred. And for the first couple weeks I was out there, I was doing okay. I wasn't drinking. I was staying out of trouble. I was smoking.
You don't know anybody at first.
Yeah, I didn't know anybody there other than my dad and like a couple friends who were out there, but they weren't doing hard drugs. I was skateboarding. I was smoking cannabis, sure, but not even in an addictive manner because I was high on the fact that I had evaded my consequences. But then I always like to say things happen for a reason, and we get taught harsh lessons in our lives when we least expect it. And I don't wish this on anybody, but what happened is, when I had stopped drinking, my wisdom teeth, I was 20 at the time, were all coming in at the same time, and they came in impacted. And the one line I swore I would never cross was pharmaceutical drugs or opioids or benzos or whatever. I'd played around with them a little bit, like that wasn't going to be my drug of choice. I still had all these delusions about, I just got in a DUI, but like I'm a private school drunk. I just crashed my car and like, I got all these like substance charges for like petty weed sales, but like I'm an uptown pot dealer. Like I still have this egotistical thing going in my head, and underneath all that facade, it's just hating myself. But I am determined to keep up this chemical facade, whatever it is, so I don't have to get in contact with that. But when I got to get my wisdom teeth removed, because it wasn't just a simple extraction, it was like jaw work. It was like, it was a big dental surgery. They put me under with like propofol. But before that, like heavy anesthetic hit, I had this t-shirt on that said Raw Rolling Papers on it, a weed rolling paper brand, and the doctor, like something straight out of a comedy sketch, like the room's starting to spin and get blurry and I'm tapping out, and the last thing I hear is like, you can't smoke weed after the surgery, and I'm like, huh? And then I wake up, that's the last thing I remember, and I'm like, so you're telling me I can't smoke weed? He's like, no, it's not just you can't smoke weed, you can't drink, you can't smoke cigarettes, you can't have nicotine in your mouth, like you cannot have anything. The act is not just the chemicals, the act of sucking anything through a straw even. You can't drink sodas through a straw. It'll pull like the class out of the sockets and you'll get dry socket, which opioid painkillers can't even touch. And I was like, well, damn. But then they gave me another solution, supposedly a destructive chemical would-be solution. And this one didn't come in a weed bag or a Coke bag or an alcohol bottle. It came in a pill bottle, and they gave me a little bit too much of it. And I don't blame the doctor. The opioid epidemic was still surging strong. The Purdue Pharma OxyContin lawsuits hadn't really settled yet, and the public perception was still to treat pain rather than treat the patient. And there's a lot of different things I want to make it clear. If you're a cancer patient, if you're a long-term chronic like fibromyalgia or whatever patient, I support people taking pain medicine who need it. Yeah. But for me at the time, it was painful. I didn't need it. And by the time I took that 5th Percocet pill, I had the same kind of aha moment that I had with that like beer bottle in my friend's basement when I was 13 times 1,000. Instead of like a key turning in a lock like that was, it was like the gates of like, a Trojan palace opening up, like big time. It was like I finally felt that comfort I had been seeking, that when my tolerance to alcohol had gone away and the voices had started to come back, but not anymore. But it took me about 4 or 5 years to get a real alcohol dependency. It took me about 4 or 5 weeks with opioids. And I'm not going to drug-a-log too much anymore because if you've been through it or you're a family member, you know the story. Every single line I thought I wouldn't cross, I went from, taking a pill every day to pawning my computer, stealing from my friends, hitting petty licks just for people I didn't even know just to get my next pill. But the one line I thought I wouldn't cross was heroin, but I crossed that too. I started sniffing heroin. I went to rehab for the first time. My family made me, but I wasn't ready to quit. I just did it to avoid consequences. And when I got out, I had this false ego complex again that I had proven to them that I could get sober. And I thought I had proven to myself, I knew I was an addict, but that I was capable of detoxing, which I hadn't done since I had started using opioids. So I went back to school and I started using occasionally. And the crazy thing was that out of sheer willpower, that discipline they talk about, like, oh, you can just use discipline to quit. Maybe for some people, but not for me. But I could manage it. I did for a couple months. I was moderating my use. But the thing is, I was absolutely miserable while doing it. I wasn't enjoying moderation. And the high was taken away by me being so obsessed constantly about the next hit that I might as well have been getting high the way that I wanted, the destructive, deadly way. So I went back to that. Consequences increased.
Because the chase truly is part of the high, too.
Yes, the whole culture, the whole everyday struggle.
Absolutely.
The chaos.
So you're in school and you're in this point, rock bottom. People say you've got to hit rock bottom to come up. is it possible to hit rock bottom more than once?
I hit many bottoms, and I'll give a kind of like diluted Spark Notes version of 3 key moments that made me know that I had to change. My dad seeing me in the hospital having a seizure from opioid withdrawal, couldn't do it. My mom finding needles and me being in and out of outpatient treatment, just doing it to avoid consequences. My friends starting to die, didn't do it. What did it, the first day I knew that I had to really do something different was when I woke up dope sick and I was considering killing myself, but I went down, I was trying to judge whether my apartment building had a rooftop high enough to really kill me, because I knew that my family wasn't going to give me any money. I didn't have the strength to rob anybody, and I was just so broken. And I was scrounging for cigarettes in the street, because that's what I did. I went from private school and luxury vacations and caring parents to literally blood on my flannel that I haven't washed in 3 weeks because the pennies that would use in the laundry machine are going to crack and dope. Scrounging cigarettes off the street, haven't showered in weeks. I find a $20 bill there. And I go down to the block. I get a 10 of dope, 5 of crack, 40 ounce of weed. 40 ounce of beer and like a piece of chicken from KFC. And I go home and I think I have everything I need, but then I realize this is not what I need to do. And then I get back home and the drugs are still working for me, supposedly. Like, they're still my solution. I steal more money from my family and go up to New York City to get the best dope that I can, because the walls are closing in on me at this point. My family's staging an intervention. They're getting ready to do it. My mom's told me that she still loves me and she's never going to give up on me, but she's surrendered to the fact that I'm a lying, conning, thieving, manipulating addict, and the disease isn't just stronger than me at the time, it's stronger than her. And that was painful, but I went up to this seedy motel room in New Jersey with a couple bundles of dope and like an 8-ball of white that I was cooking into crack. And I shot up a bunch of dope and I got chemically high, but I didn't get emotionally or spiritually high. Didn't take me where I want to go. The voices were still there. And then I knew I had 3 options. I could either try to keep using and get back the feeling, which I knew wasn't going to come back because my tolerance was so high. There were no more, I exhausted all the drugs. There's nothing more than IV fentanyl. That you can't go any further in that universe. I could try to intentionally OD, which I had done several times to no avail, or I could actually go to treatment and ask for help. Mm-hmm. And that was the real point where, after the third thing, which is the outpatient treatment center that I had used for maintenance medications and not to get clean, just to avoid consequences and trick my family, said, you need to go to inpatient. We're not putting up with this anymore. Right. And so I called the treatment center with the needle in my arm, but I called him and I actually was like, if anything's going to work, it's this. And the night before, I tried to overdose and kill myself again, but I woke up. I didn't even pass out. I put all the dope that I had, close to half an eighth of fentanyl-laced heroin in the rig, and I shot it, and I wanted to die. I didn't think I deserved to live. I didn't think I was capable of recovering, and I woke up. And it was a hot, smuggy DC. I'm sorry, this is just a little day on June 13th, 2016. And I got in what they call the druggy buggy, this van to go to treatment. And I had nothing but sadness, emptiness, fear, and hate in my heart. I get there, they strip me down, they put me in scrubs, they ask me questions, they give me some detox medications that aren't touching it. And I know that it's time. Mm-hmm. And I met some amazing people in treatment. I really opened my mind to the message that I had been listening to for the past 10 years and thinking, oh, that's great, but not me. That's great that, fellowships work for them. That's great that recovery works for them, but not for me. I'm wound too tight. I'm too terminally unique. I'm all these delusions that I had, but I finally was so broken and beaten down that I opened my mind to the message. And halfway through, I'll be honest, I wanted to leave because I made a selfish decision and I got involved with a girl there who was equally as broken as I was for that external distraction. Yeah. So even when I was chemically sober, I was projecting my fears and insecurities and anxieties onto this girl who did not deserve that. I mean, she wanted to do it too. It was consensual, but I shouldn't have, if I was where I was at now, I would have been like, no, you're beautiful, this isn't the time or place. But I was just searching the same way I was for a drug for something outside of me, and that transferred on to codependency. But then someone started a rumor about me, and she didn't want to talk to me anymore. And this Dawson's Creek rehab romance was like the little emotional straw that broke the camel's back. And so I packed my stuff up. I called my family. I manipulated my mom, telling her I wanted to go to another treatment center. And she loved me so much, enabled, whatever you want to call it, that she agreed. And I'm sitting in the office, and there's this mirror on the desk, and I'm telling the counselor I'm going to go to treatment when really I'm just going to take the money they're Western Unioning me to use in the closest open-air drug market in Philly, because the treatment center's in Pennsylvania. And I look on the mirror and I see a couple paths for my life, the same thing. If I go back to using, if I try to kill myself, or if I run towards the truth of what I'm scared to confront, the scared little kid with Asperger's, the scared little kid who was bullied in school, the scared little kid who's afraid of his mom's abusive boyfriend, the scared little kid who doesn't believe that he's deserving of life. And I started trembling and shaking because I knew it was going to be harder for me to keep using than it was to recover. I didn't do it because it was the right thing to do. I didn't do it because I was brave or courageous. I did it because I was tired. And a lot of people say addicts are lazy.
Scared, I'm sure.
Oh my God, I was terrified.
You're at that point.
It was like I'm here in this corner with, these windows. You're backed into a corner. And I stayed. And I really think that's the day I got sober. It's like 2 weeks, 15 days. I don't know exactly. It was like late June. I got sober from drugs on June 13th, but I realized that I had to run towards something bigger than myself and my insecurities and fears. I had to ask for help. I had to take responsibility for the damage that I had done. I got out of treatment. I met my mom at the recovery house when they took me back on July 13th, and she had discovered a cache of paraphernalia that would make Train Spotting or Requiem for a Dream or any drug movie or any Backstage with Nikki Sixx in the 80s look like play school. And she just said to me, "That's great, you're sober. What are you going to do to keep it?" And she said, "I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm paying for 3 months at the recovery house, but then you got to support yourself. You got to get a job." And I'm like, whoa, this is different.
Right. But Who is this lady talking to me?
But thank God she did.
Yeah.
Because during the time I was at treatment, she had space to talk to the people, and she's in recovery too. That's the crazy thing. She was 5 years sober, watching me devolve into this opioid mess for 5 years, feeling so helpless. But when I was gone, she got the clarity to talk to the people in her fellowship and ask their advice. And they told her that's what you got to do, and she stuck to it. But the one thing she did besides that tough love at the right time, was she took me to a place, a recovery event, where there were so many other people who helped me in my journey. Because my mom loved me. She is an inspirational figure in my recovery, but she knew that she couldn't do it alone. So she brought me to some guys who could, and they ended up really helping me through all the challenges, getting my first job, getting the applications denied, getting my heart broken the first time in recovery. I'm not going to lie. That day I called the dealer, and thank God the dealer did not pick up when I was 6 months clean. I made it through the first year and a half of my recovery by asking for help when I didn't want to. And it's not because, I wanted everything to be perfect in my life. It's that I wanted to be able to deal with the imperfections. Somebody told me in a pretty mean-spirited, but I needed to hear the message way, you're not going to get a parade for getting sober. And it's true. But I got to make my own parade, and I got to make my own life better by taking suggestions and applying the same principles that I applied to my recovery of acceptance, surrender, accountability towards other things, towards my family, towards my job, towards my relationships, towards my relationship with myself. Sure, other people held me accountable, and that's great, in my fellowship, in my job, in my family, but I had to learn to internalize that. The same way I internalized that, sensory overload in the beginning and magnified it, I had to internalize those lessons and magnify them towards positivity in a different manner. And, when I was 2.5 years clean, I had gotten things back that I never thought that I deserved, that I never thought would be possible. I had 2 full-time jobs, one as a patient advocate, helping people at the same treatment center that told me that I needed to go to treatment. And weirdly enough, one was working as a bartender. It was funny because, actually one of the dudes at the bar who I was serving drinks came in one day and he asked for, a champagne-free, virgin mimosa. And then the next day I saw him in one of the therapy groups. And I was like, no cross-pollination. But that was a beautiful moment because every time he came back from the bar and he realized I was sober, he was like, it was cool. We had mutual respect. But one thing I had given up was not given up, just done it on a more personal level, was the thought of ever telling my story publicly, let alone through music, because for a while I thought that returning to that same scene that I had been in for so long in active addiction wasn't possible, and that's true. I couldn't go back to making music the same way, just like I couldn't go back to living the same way. But you might be wondering why someone with a mid-Atlantic accent like me is up here in Vermont, and I love living here. But, you know, my dad built a house in the 70s up in Sandgate, which is a tiny little, like, you know, one-horse town, a beautiful one-horse town in Bennington County. And he said that he was going to have to sell that house when I was in active addiction, and that broke my heart because it was like a symbol of our father-son connection. But when I was sober for a year, he gave it to me. And while I was getting my recovery on track, I would go up there and visit. But every time that I visited up there, something else would happen. It's way on the top of this like dirt road that can't be plowed. The pipes burst, shingles fell off the roof, a tree fell in the road. Like, it was just more than I could manage. But I didn't know how I was going to be able to move up to Vermont. But serendipitously, about 2.5 years in, my 27th birthday, I meet this dude a couple days after my birthday when I'm up there fixing the house that owns a studio in East Arlington. And he's a doctor and a Broadway producer. We can get more into that later, but we developed this relationship of openness and honesty and mutual support, where he not only supported my recovery because of his experience as a general physician who had seen the impact of the opioid epidemic, and as a philanthropist who owned several local businesses on a community level that was involved with initiatives such as the ones that you're spearheading and being a face of here, and thank you for doing that were combating the epidemic through advocacy and public stuff. So we got to work together on that while we worked on my album, and I moved up to Vermont. And the past, you know, it's crazy to even think this, 4.5 years living up here. I've spent more time in my recovery here than I have in my hometown of DC. It's just been incredible. It's been incredible to meet people like you. It's been incredible to be involved in fellowship, be involved in community advocacy. I see you got the Jenna's Promise Roasting Company coffee. Through my work as a journalist, I was able to do an article on them. I've gotten to link up with incredible people like Mickey Wiles at Working Fields, people at Turning Point centers throughout the state. Dr. Mark Levine, shout out Mark. I got a link with him. We never worked in an official capacity, but we got to have some amazing conversations about recovery and the need for transparent advocacy. And, you know, so many incredible people. Ed Bride from the Addiction Recovery Channel. You know, no, sorry, I said Ed Bride. How dare I? Ed Baker. Ed Baker from the Addiction Recovery Channel. I'm gonna get that right. Ed Bride's a dude down in Massachusetts that does music. Ed Baker. I'm tired. I'm a dad of a 1-year-old kid. Y'all gotta forgive me. Ed Baker's amazing. I love that dude. He's doing amazing work for harm reduction. But more than any of that, more than any of the, you know, gifts and prizes I have, my son, my beautiful girlfriend, my job, my social media advocacy, the freedom I have from the need to jump outside of myself to look for the solution, the freedom I have from self-hatred, the freedom I have from self-deprecation, the freedom I have from crawling into my mom's room to steal her purse to not be dope sick, the freedom I have from burning bridges with my friends, and the ability I have to chase a solution rather than my next bag and my next fix is bigger than any of that. And I will lose absolutely everything that I have in an instant if I don't keep the fact that all I have is today front and center. And I know I went on, I gassed on, I make reels, I run a radio show too, so you already know we like to talk, but that's it, and we can open up the conversation. I'd love to keep talking about everything you're doing, but thank you so much for giving me a platform to honestly share.
Absolutely. I'm truly honored to have you. And like I said, it's a big box for you. And now, to me, it's such a big deal that you're a dad. Seeing the pictures of you with him and just, it's amazing. Like, I always get super choked up when I see your pictures of him. And your newest one, your latest, is 7 years sober. And I don't want to say his name because I don't know how you all feel about that. But he's just adorable.
Thank you. I'll say his name. His name's Jude. And he is an absolute blessing. I've learned so much more from him than he's learned from me, and I'm sure that will continue to be the case. And I talked about applying principles of recovery towards things in life. Mm-hmm. And there are so many times where I've had to apply surrender, acceptance, and that same running towards the truth instead of running like away with escapism. Because, you know, your mom, like, when it's 3 a.m. and, you know, the dog's sick. My dog's been sick too, so I've been like taking him for midnight walks because he's sick to his stomach, and we don't want to get the house dirty. And you're changing the diaper, and, you know, my partner's in the bed and she's nursing him and she needs me to get him water, and I'm tired and I got work I got to do and all this stuff. grounding in gratitude for the fact that, recovery makes it possible for me to have these responsibilities, and seeing that responsibility, whether it's being a dad, being a community member, being a member of a recovery fellowship or support group, whatever path of recovery you choose, it's not a burden. It's something that will build strength. I think a good analogy is, it's like if you carry around a 50-pound weight by the seat of your pants and you're just dragging it and not focusing that burden and that responsibility like you're going to the gym and lifting it, you're not going to get stronger. It's just going to hold you back. But what I've found is that if I engage with the responsibility and take it on as much as I don't want to, because that innate addictive escapist drive is always going to be there, but if I truly recognize the blessing of where I'm at, and I truly recognize that I have the opportunity to learn so much from confronting the fear, not just of being, a person in recovery who has to deal with life on life's terms, but a dad, a partner, a son, all of these things, then I'm not just going to be able to be there for the people in my life. I'm going to be able to learn the lessons that are going to help me too from it.
You'll be there for yourself.
Exactly.
Being a dad, does it scare you? Does it scare the shit out of you as far as because what could happen. You know what the world is like and where we're at. And for me, that's part of doing this, because I think if I can help one person, if I can just bring light to one person, but now that one person is this little Jude that's sitting on your knee, what do you do with that?
When I was in the hospital, me and my partner Alex, she and I like to joke that she thought it was going to be much easier than it was, and it turned out to be much harder than her expectations. I thought it was going to be. It's hard. It's so hard, and it's only going to get harder as he becomes conscious, and it switches from just pure nourishment and cuddling to actually teaching and trying to transmit what I've learned and learn new things and teach him to read and all that stuff. But I had never held a baby in my life. I mean, I'd been scared to. I honestly thought their necks were brittle like twigs, so you had to keep the neck. It's everyone, so you got to hold the baby's neck the right way, and I thought that it would literally snap if I didn't. So one time, I was changing him, and he thrashed a little bit when he first got mobile, when he was 3 or 4 months, and his neck went back for the first time. I was like, oh God. Mm-hmm. But that's not what it is, and I probably could have asked someone, and they would have told me that. But just little things like that, the first time that I let him crawl off on his own without micromanaging, let him play with the blocks on his own. Now he's got this jungle gym, this gym that's just, with a little mini ramp with a rock wall, and that's scary. But letting go of resentments and anger is a lot like letting go of your kid and letting them move forward. Mm-hmm. And I think my biggest challenge isn't going to be the fear of what's going to happen to him, rather the fear of what I can't be there to teach him. Mm-hmm. And letting go of that need to constantly shape him in terms of my ideology, my principles. But what I will say, and this is very important to me, is a lot of people say, well, why you're going to have to stop talking about addiction. Your kid's going to know you're an addict. They look up to you. People who aren't really down with open recovery like that, just be quiet about it. Keep his innocence. Make sure he doesn't know that you ever struggled until he's 13 or 14. And I'm absolutely not.
Not. Good for you.
No,
Good
that's
for
not
you.
what I'm going to do. And they said, well, what if he becomes an addict? What are you going to do? I'm going to help him. Mm-hmm. That's what. I'm not going to enable him. He's got to get the keys to his own success, but I'm not going to banish him out of my life. I'm going to try my best to help him and use what I've learned. I didn't get sober so that my kids will never struggle with addiction. It's in their blood. It's in their psyche. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I got sober so that if any of those behavioral issues arise, I can be there with that knowledge and that lived experience, the same way I could help another addict, or anybody in recovery could try their best to help another addict who's 38. You know what I mean? It does scare me. it scares the living hell out of me, but that fear is good. I had a friend who's a dad. I'm scared. He's like, good. It would be pretty awful if you weren't, man. Like, that shows you care. That shows you love them. And I have the same fear about my recovery, but that shows that I cherish it too. And they're just so interconnected, like the recovery and the parenting in a lot of ways. And I'm super grateful for that.
I'm super grateful for you too. Like, I just you blow my mind every time we talk.
Likewise.
I just came, I don't know. You just blow my mind. But I want to touch a little bit on your music, because that's a big deal. It's I listen to it all.
Oh,
even though, like, I'm straight up honest with you, you know, I'm not like this huge rap fan, none of that. It sometimes makes me a little anxious. I don't know why, but I can listen to your stuff and I can feel it. And the fact that you do stuff with the piano, and which nobody would probably think of when it comes to rap music and different things, it's amazing. And it's intense. It's super intense. Yeah. And you can feel it. And I just absolutely adore how you truly tell your story. It's not someone else's story. It's your story. And you can tell that.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad you listen to the music. And there's a lot of great music now. It's really broadening that isn't just hip-hop. That hip-hop led the way in a lot of ways. Although, you know, Neil Young did that song, The Needle and the Damage Done. There's a lot of metaphoric old folk songs about addiction or alcoholism. There's great ballads about it. But hip-hop led the way in terms of, like, recovery rap and addiction rap and all that. But, you know, Jelly Roll is
I love him.
You like Jelly Roll?
I do.
I was listening to Winston Chapel on the way up here. I love playing Jelly when I'm driving through, you know, Vermont's kind of country scenes. Even though he's a Tennessee mountains boy, it's like, it's just something about that, like, you know, country imagery really goes well with it. But just such an amazing album. He's not 100% sober. He drinks, but he conquered his painkiller addiction one day at a time, and he's a big champion for recovery. And that song, that song, Save Me, you know, all of his albums, all of his music, he's just a real voice for it. But in terms of my music, and there's so many recovery rappers that I could shout out, some who live here in Vermont that I play on my radio show, Clean Jams. But in terms of my music, it was interesting when I got sober. I didn't just have to, like, figure out how to make, because I made music glorifying addiction for so long that I had to figure out how to switch it up to, like, talk about recovery. But after I figured out how to do that and reframe my voice through, like, the verses I was writing, it was more, the beats didn't really match what I was talking about in my new energy. And I'd always been scared to combine my love for classical piano with hip hop. But what ended up happening is that it came as a natural convergence, because those two sides of myself, you know, the musical legacy in my family, the discipline growing up a piano, and then the freedom of expressive, you know, separate from hip-hop, although hip-hop, I do consider my music to have big hip-hop roots, and I have big respect for the hip-hop community. Just the freedom of freestyling and that cipher tradition of talking through rhyme and, you know, sharing your story. It seemed not only to be at odds musically, but in terms of culturally, in terms of what part of myself it represented. But when I made peace with those two sides of myself in recovery and I integrated that, the music just integrated naturally. And it was just like a couple breakthroughs I had when I learned to play and rap at the same time. And then, like I say, you know, earlier when I was sharing my story, I ran into Dr. Joshua Sherman over at Old Mill Road Media and Old Mill Road Recording, who's currently my friend, boss, mentor. He's a great guy, and he's really showed me the way on a lot of things. And we worked together on the project. And I was able to figure out how to make a narrative story about my recovery through music. And we're working on the second album now, and I'm super grateful that I've been able to take my recovery music in a different direction recently with the social media stuff I've been doing through the Benjamin Lerner page. And I've been releasing a 16-bar, like 1-minute verse every Friday, because while I'm working on the second album, it's become a way for me to translate what I'm going through and my discipline and my passion for recovery on a weekly basis and just remind myself through the music. It's like some people say to me in, like, comments on my reels across platforms, like, why do you always talk about recovery? Like, why don't you just tell stories from your life? Like, I'm sober, but, like, recovery isn't everything. And recovery isn't everything. Like, you know, I'm a dad, I'm a journalist, I'm a musician, I'm a son, I'm all these things, and I have a bunch of different passions besides just that. But recovery is intersectional in everything that I do. I don't let it slip out of my mind. So if I let recovery slip out of my music in the same way, I'm not going to apply the same energy that allowed me to have the breakthroughs both in life and in music that I had. I'm going to lose sight of it. So if I don't keep recovery at the forefront in my music, I'm not going to have the passion or the drive necessary to write songs that aren't about recovery. And my second album is more about, family stuff, being a dad, confronting underlying issues, but that recovery essence is still all the way there. So to anybody who's like struggling in active addiction, whether you're a musician, a carpenter, a tradesperson, whatever, finding a way to integrate passion in a way that isn't at odds with my recovery is what made my recovery possible in every sense. So I like to think that if I'm not naturally feeling a sentiment that I'm putting on the microphone or that I'm writing down in one of my columns or like saying in one of my reels, all my reels are improvised. The verses are written, but like people are like, oh, how long does it take you to write these reels? I don't write them. Mm-hmm. I just talk to the camera like I'm doing right now. And it's the same thing as the freestyle. Like the greatest thing about freestyle rap is that you can't rehearse it. Mm-hmm. So that's the same thing like talking here. I haven't rehearsed this. And there's a great thing in some recovery fellowships where someone knows that they're going to be a speaker at a recovery event. Then they get in their head, they start trying to plan it. Mm-hmm. So whenever I'm in charge of recovery events or fellowship events and I'm there to pick a speaker, I never get somebody who knows they're going to speak. I always look in the crowd at the person who's looking down. I'm like, hey, do you want to do it? And 9 times out of 10, the accomplished speakers, the recovery circuit speakers don't have anything. Well, they could be them, yeah. I've had some great people who have incredible experience, strength, and hope through that, but the people who don't think they're speakers, the people who don't have time to rehearse, have the most heartfelt stuff because all those barriers come down. Mm-hmm. So that's the spirit I try to bring through my music and the advocacy is just like, if I'm thinking about it too much and it's not natural, it's not where I want to go.
Where can we find your music?
Spotify, YouTube, the reels are on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram. BenjaminLerner.clean is the Facebook _ Benjamin.Lerner Instagram, at Benjamin Lerner Recovery TikTok, and it's the Benjamin Lerner YouTube channel. And the second album should be dropping relatively soon in studio terms, like 2 years, but the first is Clean, one word, Benjamin Lerner, and Spotify is the best platform for sound fidelity.
That's
but
where I
anyway,
listen.
Yeah,
That's
Spotify is great.
Spotify.
They got amazing music.
So you do these reels. I watch those too. I keep track of your Facebook page,
Thank
and
you.
I share a lot of them.
Oh my God! Thank you.
It's well, they're helpful, and
thank you.
Having your energy, because we know you have a ton of energy.
Yeah,
I don't even know where you get it.
Not just from this chai latte.
Right.
I've slept 8 hours over the past 4 days on dad mode. I don't know where it's coming from either.
But you do. I mean, you have a lot of energy, and that energy is what some of us need, even just on a daily, even as a mom, just to have that energy, and your passion gives me hope. It gives me a little bit of hope that maybe at some point we will get there too.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm glad they resonate. Thank you so much for sharing them. It brings a smile to my heart whenever someone from the local community shares the reels, and I had an incredible experience when I was down at the park with Jude and my dog and my partner, and my partner had taken my baby to the playground, and I was just sitting on the bench because I was so tired, and with the dog, and this lady comes up to me, and she's like, "Are you the kid with the reels about recovery?" And at first she had like an accusatory tone, and I've gotten people who like have told me like from fellowships and stuff, stop doing this, it's breaking anonymity, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. I recover out loud. I'm not ashamed of it. That's just what I do. But she said, "Thank you, because my daughter's struggling, and I just want you to know that I watch them, and the same thing, like, it lets me know that not only are the addicts not alone, but the families aren't alone too." Mm-hmm. And, I can't predict the future. I don't know if any of my family members are ever going to struggle like me. I don't know what it's like to be a family member of a loved one with addiction. My mom and I are the only ones, like when I'm not actively using, like when I'm sober, or when I'm not an addict, maybe I have a glass of wine every now and then, but that's not my problem. I don't know what that's like. But what I do know what it's like is to look in the eyes of my mom or my dad when they're really afraid. Look into the eyes of my friends when they're just like, how could you have fallen so far? And so to be able to give back that way, I'm not going to call it giving back. I don't want to be self-serving. The reels are open to interpretation. I'm just speaking from my experience. But I do try to do the lives and the reels in a way that isn't just about, I try to make them very general. They are my stories, but I try to speak in general and non-specific terms that other people can identify with. It's a fairly simple formula every time. It's sober person encounters obstacle. Resentment, anxiety, or fear pops up in anything. Sober person has ultimatum moment within their head where they're like, should I curse this person out? Should I run away? Should I do X? Sober person who is still dealing with these issues and not perfect by any means taps into a power greater than their self, whether you choose to call that spirituality or whatever, the program, whatever, or just the wisdom of something that he's gotten before from someone far wiser than him or her, to power through it. Mm-hmm. And that can apply to families too, because the same unmanageability, whether it's within our own lives or other people's, is something that we have to live with. And it just warms my heart whenever I hear people saying that they relate to it, because honestly, like, I've been doing this, like, when I last came on the podcast, like, I never thought I would do social media stuff the way I'm doing it right now. Like, I had a column, I had the show, we occasionally posted on social media, but then I saw that the recovery reel universe had just exploded. Mm-hmm. And there were so many content creators. I mean, I could name them on here. I could name like 10 that have been incredibly influential in posting me, but I'll refrain from doing that because I know I'm going to like leave people out. But these people are like my friends now over great distances. And just seeing the fact that people are willing to advocate for recovery, and not just the creators, but like people in the comments, people on the lives, people who share, people who message me or like message each other. I've seen people in the comments on the lives like, hey, hit me up. And what that shows me is like, it's great that I'm making content. It's great that other people are making content. It's great that we can monetize those platforms, make it part of our lives, like whatever. But at the end of the day, the reason why I'm doing this is because when I was in early recovery, this type of advocacy, the type of stuff you're doing with like an addiction and recovery focused live broadcast, that was not a thing. That was in 2016, it's not that long ago, but only celebrities had lives. Only people with like 1 million followers had lives, and recovery was a taboo subject. No one was talking about that. Everyone was just promoting albums, promoting movies, getting fan bucks or like whatever, and it's amazing to see the progress that's been made and the openness that people have to a message of recovery through social media. And so thank you so much for watching. I love watching your content. I'm big fanboys of all the stuff you're doing on a non-recovery community basis, uplifting the community, spotlighting it, and especially your brave openness to celebrate recovery in every sense. So y'all are heroes of mine, because in a community like up here that's dealing with what it is, the whole state of Vermont, to take that stand. What inspired, I mean, I know it's your show, I want you to ask the questions, but I'd love to know, like, what inspired you with It's No Secret? Like, what made you want to, like, really give a platform specifically to addiction and recovery?
Well, it's actually, It's No Secret is in memory of Tyler Matthews, who is a young man who passed away on Mother's Day. And he, the son to a very good friend of mine. And that was enough for me. That was the tipping point for me, was like, okay, I'm done with this. I am just done, and I have to do something, because it's not a secret. And that's why, and I always say that to my son. I always say, it's no secret. We all know. So just let's talk about it. Say you need help. Say, why did you do this or do that before you called? Why do you call me after the fact? It's no secret. And when I found out that Tyler died, that was it for me. That was like the straw.
That's a beautiful thing, to turn that pain into purpose, though. And I borrowed that phrase. I will shout out one recovery creator, because that is his phrase. His book is Prison to Purpose. Jimmy McGill, he's super active on the recovery thing. And when I heard that, like, pain to purpose, it's a phrase I've heard knocked around in recovery fellowships. But, like, you turning that community loss into a platform where addicts in recovery, their families, the community, everybody can kind of rally around a central point of hope and acceptance and reducing that stigma. It's just beautiful. And I mean, just being able to speak openly and have it be no secret. That's so freeing, because there are so many points in my recovery, whether it was in my job at first, the first time someone saw, like, a track mark scar and I had to explain it, in interviews where for my journalism job where people offer me wine and I'm like, no, I can't. I used to be afraid because I'd have these interviews with like CEOs and like all this stuff for my tourist magazine jobs, and they're offering, and I don't want to be rude, but now I straight up tell them, I'd be like, I'm a heroin addict in recovery, like XYZ years, like, and some of them like, whoa, but that's what I have to do, because if it makes them respect me less, so be it. I'm gonna respect myself.
I would
more.
hope they respect
Most
you
do.
more. I would hope that they did.
Most do. A couple grimace, but if I'm being all the way real, I don't want to take anybody else's inventory, but I think a lot of people, I said this on one of my reels, I don't want to shame anybody for drinking or using. I love people who drink and use unsustainably. I think they deserve recovery, or at the very least harm reduction, so that they stay alive. I don't judge anybody for drinking or using, because that would be judging my former self. And I'm trying to move past that. But on the few occasions that people do feel threatened just by the mention of recovery, often it's because, and even people who aren't alcoholics or addicts, I mean, only they can decide that, but sometimes come up to me and they're like, well, just so you know, like, I only drink, like trying to justify it to me and stuff, and I can sense that there's discomfort because they're asking those questions within themselves. But being open and honest about the fact that we're in recovery, or we are the family members of people in active addiction in recovery, isn't that freeing?
Yeah.
Yeah, but not everybody knows that. People are afraid.
And as a community, that the other part of this all for me is that as a community that often looks down their noses, judges the stigma of it all, as when community members do that, it's super tough for me because they don't want that here. Well, you know what? It is here. So let's work together to fix it. And if you don't know, just like anything else, if you don't know, you can't fix it. So let's talk about it. Let's figure out how we're going to be part of the solution instead of looking down our nose and thinking, that guy's a, dirtbag. You've heard all of the names. You've heard all of this shit. It's the way it is.
Yeah.
And I just feel like if we can change that even just a tiniest bit, the path would be different.
Yeah.
For so many. I recently was at treatment court, and I've told a few people this story, but a local woman here paints rocks in memory of her son who committed suicide. He was young, committed suicide, and now she paints these rocks with these amazing inspirational messages on them and hides them in the community. And if you find them, you pick them up, you keep them, and you pass them along. But she had given me a bag of these rocks, and I had them in my car. I hadn't done anything with them. I knew what they were, and I thought they were beautiful. And I was over at treatment court, right, just down the road with my son, sitting outside, and I listened to the treatment court on Zoom. I don't ever go in. He knows I'm listening because I want to know what the hell's going on, and I know I'm not going to find out exactly what's going on from him. I'm just not. It's not going to happen. So I always listen, but I always get extremely emotional. And so I stay in my car with my tissues because I cry through most of it. And it was a bad day. There was a bad day per se, where a lot of them that were going before the judge had struggled for the weekend. They had really had a hard time. Maybe they used, maybe they, didn't get to see their kids, or a special visit with their kid didn't go so great, whatever. It was just the emotions were so heavy. And I looked over to get another tissue out of my glove box, and there was the bag of rocks. So I took them, and I got out of my car, and I placed them all around the courthouse. And as people came out of court that day, they were seeing the rocks, and they were picking them up, and they would look at them and smile and put them in their pocket.
That's amazing.
And that was like for me, that was a big deal too. And it was a sense almost of reality. It was a little bit of something that small made a big difference to them. And if when they're walking up Main Street, and maybe they're not walking so right, they may be shaking like a leaf because they've been somebody who has used an addiction for a long time, or they fidget, or they're just a little bit different. It doesn't hurt to smile at them or say, have a good day as they pass by, instead of a smart ass remark. Because you're just like the rock, that might make a huge difference. Maybe not today, but making them feel worthy is what we should be doing.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. And thank you so much for sharing that. That's honestly, that might be the most beautiful metaphor for like picking up pieces of positivity that the community offers from that pain that has transformed it. I mean, like every piece of that. Like people talk about how addiction and chaos and misery can ripple like a butterfly effect. I think hope can too. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people find hope in times of extreme challenge and misery. And, whatever silver lining we can find, like, let's talk about the chain there. Like, this woman who's grieving the loss of her child who passed away due to a bout with mental illness issues made these rocks. You, a mom who is the mother of someone who struggles with substance use disorder, during a time that you were saddled with your grief about the situation, your stress, your anxiety, found the volition to get these rocks that were a piece of comfort for you, hold on to that positive energy passed on by that grieving mom. Then you took that positive energy that she had given you and you gave it to the people freely who are dealing with institutional and legal damage as a result of their addiction. And it's a complete circle, because the catalyst of that horrible, unconscionable, just sad event of that loss was transmitted into something beautiful that led to other people healing. And every step of that chain along the way, there's reverberating effects. What I would want to ask is, because a lot of people always ask me about what can be done to help addicts. What can be done? What could have been done differently? That's the favorite, is from a prevention standpoint. I have so much love for prevention. Do you think anything could have helped you? Maybe. I like to think I would have, turned to drugs anyway. That's just my story. Other people are helped by prevention. Kids have their lives completely changed. But my question to you would be, as a mom of an addict, what could the community do? What could people, not in any official institutional, public or private or medical position, do? The same way, smiling at people in recovery on the street. Like, what y'all need support and love too. Like, come on. Like, I keep hammering this, but addiction's a community disease. What would you like to see on a micro or macro level done to help y'all with what you're going through?
What I would like to see personally is, I think the community just recognizing that every minute counts, and that it's work. It's a full-time job. It doesn't go away overnight. It just doesn't. And you're 7 years in, but you have to work every day at it. It's a job. This is a job. And so the person trying to recover by no means is lazy. This is a shit ton of work that literally takes every ounce of their being every day just to get up sometimes. Just for people to know that and recognize that. And I think, and I mean, always, I wish there were more services. I just do. I wish that, but when I say services could just mean that we talk about it more, that we're honest about it more. When you see an obituary in the paper, that to somehow give the parent strength enough to be truthful about how it happened. So when the 50, 60, 70-year-old that maybe didn't always deal with the things that we deal with right now in life, when they're reading those obituaries, they're like, damn, this happened 5 times last week. What are we going to do? It's so much more than just one person, or it just, I don't even know.
It's a baffling issue.
It
It
is.
really is. There's a lot of levels to it, and there's no one size fits all solution. You're not
No.
going to be able to fix it with a band-aid or a simple fix. But with complex issues come complex conversations like the one we're having now. It's multifaceted. It's addiction, it's recovery, it's community, it's families, it's EMTs, it's policemen, it's community planners and select boards and businesses hiring people in recovery, it's jails sending out to the right type of house, and all of those interconnected things. And in talking to all of the various stages through my radio show Clean Jams, I've noticed that even when you have all of those pieces, the communications and the institutional blocks are something that really need to be worked on. But I think from a community standpoint, in terms of what I've seen, even when that institutional red tape is there, the dots do get connected by people working on a personal level to help and provide, whether it's a service or just a kind word, just like something that helps people through the day. And that's why I love what you said about people giving a good word to people on the street, because whether it's on the street, whether it's online on community forums, and I've seen some very uplifting things on community forums, and I've seen some very ratchet things on community forums. I've seen some comments on my lives and my reels that are incredibly uplifting. Shouts out to all the lovely people doing that. And, shouts out to the people saying questionable things on there too, at least for me, because I don't hate anybody. I don't hate people who say things like, I'm not going to get into really the worst things. I don't want to be triggering or really get into it. But the saddest comment I saw recently had nothing to do with me. And it was just this dad talking about how he refused to respect his son who was in recovery. And he was tying it to how he didn't have respect for me. But you don't have to respect me. I'm not doing this for respect or commendation. If I want brownie points, I'll go eat a sundae. Like, I'm not trying to do this for any other reason other than to speak my recovery, to save my own recovery, because I have to put it out there. That's the me piece. Clout and likes and follows and monetization is all great, but I got a job, I got a family. Like, the reason I'm doing this is because when I was early in recovery, this was not a thing. And if I'm not being a part of it now, then I'm part of the problem. But him saying that about his son just broke my heart, because his son is trying. And he said, well, he did all of these things. And he has his pain that needs to be addressed too. And what I wish I could tell every single person who says, well, I refuse to respect or have compassion or all of this for addicts, whether in active addiction or in recovery, well, then you're not really having compassion for the community or yourself. Because in the same way that, like, I didn't just get sober and fix my own life, like, the pain I was causing other people ceased because I was no longer doing it. Because even though from that discipline standpoint I mentioned earlier, might have made the decision to use the first drug or drink that snowballed into the thing that intersected with my mental health illnesses that made me an addict, where it was a problem. But I also made the decision to recover. And if people do not support recovery due to a moral standpoint, that's their prerogative. I'm not here to preach anything about that. You do you. But when addicts relapse and they don't have the support from their family, and people can say, oh, well, if they get knocked off their game by hearing something they're not tough enough to deserve it, well, maybe not. But it's you who's going to be picking up the tax bill when that EMT comes and that Narcan don't work. It's you who's going to be paying the state-funded detox bill because you didn't want to hire them at the job. And again, that's your decision. But until people start seeing it in a truly community fashion and connecting all the dots, they're going to separate the moral issue of them trying to preserve their own principles rather than seeing that they're going to pay both literally and metaphorically, both cash and time and sleepless nights by not doing all we can to support this. And I don't just say this as a person in recovery. I say this as a person who goes to places all across the state, inside, outside the state, jail programs, youth programs, as a speaker, as a person who goes there and sees the pain, sees beyond any institutional consequence, just people living in no way that is suitable for human existence because they're still chasing that same external solution that I was. And what I heard at this place, I'm not going to mention exactly what it was, the amount of services that people found there that didn't just help them in terms of detox in terms of sober housing, but jobs, employers who open their doors, ride programs that made it not so that they could just get a free handout, but so they could get to the place that they were able to become self-sufficient and apply those principles of recovery. Because like I said with my mom, she made the decision not just to say, you got to do this on your own. She couldn't get me sober. She used to say, I can't detox for you. I wish I could be dope sick for you. I wish I could go to rehab for you. You got to do that. And that's right. But she also knew that in order to get me to the place where I could do the work myself, she might have had to crack that door open a little bit. And I'm not asking people to fund full ride, scholarships for people to just coast on their recovery. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that if we don't start hiring people who are in recovery, they're going to turn to the street. If we don't start figuring out a way for people in recovery to get the mental health services they need, they're going to self-medicate. And that's going to be taxpayer money. Mm-hmm. And it baffles me that people, and I'm sorry to get so passionate about it. I usually don't get policy oriented, but
that's how I am about it too, though. It's true. But if they're not, it's already here. It's here, but it's here in a destructive way. So let's work together to make it here and help, and so that it's not taxing on the community, so that people aren't getting robbed, and they're not, taxpayers aren't paying to fund jail and this and that and the other, their ambulance calls, Narcan, all of those things. A lot of people in recovery, a lot of people not in recovery, they don't know any other way. Their whole life, their whole adult life, the majority of it is the hustle. That's what they know. They know how to hustle. And so we just got to trim it back a little bit and help them learn different ways. And that's going to be, and sometimes it takes a village. Even as a parent with a child, you call on your own parents, your sister, your mother, your brother, your cousin, your neighbor to help with your kids. That's what we're doing now. We're just saying we need your help as a community to help foster all of this.
And switch up the hustle. That's my favorite way, is like, people used to tell me like, oh, you got to completely change everything. I didn't lose the hunger that I brought to chasing dope and active addiction. I used it to put in job applications.
Right.
I didn't use that drive that made me walk 30 miles to steal something, then pawn it, then do. I did it to stay up all night writing my articles, or like when I was in the service industry, work 14-hour shifts. Like people have the tools of survival that can be reframed in a context of recovery.
If given the chance.
Right. And the chance looks different for everyone. The solution works different for everyone. And I support all paths of recovery. I've used, turmeric, ginger at various points in my recovery, nicotine, caffeine. Maybe that makes me not sober. But people say total chemical abstinence, you can't even have a donut. I had a cider cinnamon donut on the way here. High refined sugar might be a drug. So maybe nobody is chemically abstinent. But I support all paths of recovery. I support all harm reduction. And I think that what needs to be supported is the understanding that addiction truly is, and I'm going to say this again and again, a community disease that requires a community solution. So I would love to know, you spoke on this a little bit before we got on the air, maybe right when we got on in the beginning, but remind me, what are the initiatives here specifically that are really cool and that you want people to know about in terms of the things, the rock one was really awesome, but what else on a community level is being done to address it?
Naloxone boxes. So they've started to implement those throughout the city. Different businesses are also placing Narcan in their first aid kits, having it readily available in case of a patron or even an employee. You never know. Lunch break, any of that stuff. Associated General Contractors of Vermont is starting to do trainings and making sure that they're in on job sites, construction job sites, paving crews, that it's available on all of those sites. That's huge for me, that people are beginning to be willing to even have it and use it. And because not too long ago, they didn't want to hear anything about it. They didn't want to hear anything about saving them, because some people really get angry when they hear they may be doing it more than once. Somebody that is trying, somebody in active use may actually overdose several times. They may need to be saved several times. But somebody with a heart condition may need to be saved several times. Somebody may need to have the paddles more than once in their life. And those things happen. You wouldn't watch somebody laying on the ground having a diabetic episode with their sugar crashing and not try to get them something to eat. And this is the same for me.
Yeah, and when people say, well, I got to pay for my insulin, that's messed up too. I mean, if people don't have access to insulin, that's a whole other debate with, like, the healthcare system.
Right.
And I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to touch that kettle of fish. But where it does translate in terms of recovery is when people say, I have no compassion, usually it's because people haven't had compassion for them. And that's the mentality they've had to do, just like addicts close themselves off in that, it's no secret. When it's secret, when the sickness is secret, whether we're addicts or not, what I've seen is that everybody deserves to heal. And that sometimes, like with that rock story, that healing of the community starts, sadly, tragically, in times of crisis. And so it's incredibly sad that we're being besieged by this, fent-trank dope. It's incredibly sad that overdose numbers are spiking, I remember meeting with people, from, various public and private institutions before COVID, right when I was finishing up my album, starting my recovery advocacy journey up here. And they're like, well, we finally turned a corner. 2018, I believe, was like the first dip. And then we got this. But it's a beautiful thing that you're doing to inspire people to join together on a community basis. And I would love to... I usually post original content on my stuff. That's usually the way it is. But if you're doing like some kind of larger initiative that's like celebrating, this in your community, I would love to give a voice to it. So just keep me apprised.
I would love that too. I would love, I want to continue to share your stuff, give you some shout outs. I'd love to have you back, even not make you travel the whole way. Maybe next time we can do the whole Google Meets or something, or we could call, or I could come down your way. Or...
You and JD need, if he's open to it, both of y'all need to get on the radio show. Yeah. We would love to have you down in the studio. We can do that over Zoom. I've done I do mostly Zoom interviews because most of the people I have are like people I've met over social now. So So let's do it. And
we do. We need to keep in touch and make sure that we're shouting as loud as we can about as many things as we can. And we can all learn so much from each other. I mean, I learned all kinds of new things today that I didn't recognize maybe before that I recognize now. And it's just super important that I want everybody to tell their story, whether you're a mom, you're somebody in recovery, you're somebody, if you're currently using and you want to tell me your story, even if you don't want to be live, I want to hear from you.
Inbox is open.
Yeah.
That's what I say to people. Like, anytime.
Inbox is open.
Might not immediately respond, just the same with like people I work in, like, fellowships and stuff. We got lives. We're not omnipotent, but we want to help.
Yeah. Yeah. That's my biggest message. But thank you so very much for coming. And I hope we get to be back together soon.
Me too.
And I got to say this one more time, since my mic wasn't cooperating with me when we opened. But you've got It's No Secret. It is live right here from the Aired Out podcast in the Fly on the Wall production studio at 185 North Main Street in Barrie, directly across the street from Nelson Ace Hardware, one of our presenting sponsors. Thanks for joining us today, and don't forget to tune in on Saturday at 3:30. Barry Wagle will be with us. He is currently somebody in recovery and is going to come to share his story with us. And so again, a special episode this week on Saturday at 3:30, and I look forward to seeing you all. Have a safe ride home.